There are certain faces that become permanently woven into the fabric of a generation. Faces that you grew up watching, laughing with, crying alongside. Faces that felt less like strangers on a screen and more like friends sitting right there in your living room. Christy McNichol was one of those faces. For millions of Americans who came of age in the 1970s and 1980s, she wasn't simply an actress delivering lines from a script. She was something rarer and more precious than that. She was real. In an era of polished perfection and manufactured celebrity, Christy brought something that couldn't be faked, something that couldn't be rehearsed or produced in the studio. She brought truth. And then, without warning, she was gone. No dramatic exit. No tabloid scandal. No tearful farewell interview on a late-night couch. One day she was there, lighting up television screens across America, and then slowly, quietly, she stepped back into the shadows. For years, people wondered. For years, the question lingered in the back of the minds of everyone who had ever loved her work. What happened to Christy McNichol? Where did she go? And why did someone with that much talent, that much warmth, that much undeniable star power simply choose to disappear? Now, more than 3 decades later, we finally have the full picture. And the story that emerges is not one of failure or scandal. It is something far more human, far more moving, and ultimately far more inspiring than anything Hollywood could have ever written for her. To understand where Christy McNichol ended up, you have to understand where she came from. She was born on September 11, 1962, in Los Angeles, California. But this was not the Los Angeles of glamour and swimming pools and celebrity parties. This was the Los Angeles of working-class neighborhoods, of a single mother stretched thin, of a household where the end of the month always came a little too fast. Her mother, Carolyn, raised Christy and her older brother Jimmy largely on her own after their father left the family early in Christy's childhood. Carolyn worked multiple jobs, doing whatever it took to keep her children fed and housed. There was no roadmap to stardom in the McNichol household. There was only survival, resilience, and love. The path into entertainment opened almost accidentally, the way so many life-changing doors do. Carolyn, unable to afford childcare on certain working days, would bring Christy and Jimmy along to film sets where she occasionally picked up background work. It was on one of those sets that a production crew member, watching the 2 children with curious eyes, made an offhand remark that would alter the entire trajectory of the family's future. Those kids, the crew member said, had something special. They should try commercials. That small suggestion was the spark. Both children began auditioning, and both found moderate success in the world of television advertising. But those who worked with them noticed early on that while Jimmy was naturally charming and likable on camera, Christy possessed something harder to define and far more difficult to teach. She had emotional depth. She had presence. Even as a young child, she didn't perform for the camera so much as she seemed to forget was there. Directors noticed. Casting agents noticed. The camera itself seemed to notice, the way it always gravitates toward people who carry something real inside them. Guest roles on popular television series followed. She appeared in several shows throughout the mid-1970s, gaining experience and confidence with each job. But everything changed in 1976, when a casting call for a family drama on ABC brought her in for what would become a defining role of her early career. The show was called Family, and the character was Letitia Lawrence, known to everyone simply as Buddy. She was a teenager navigating the complicated emotional terrain of a household dealing with divorce, identity, and the messy, beautiful, painful business of growing up. It was not the kind of role that was easy to play. It required a level of emotional honesty that most adult actors struggle to access, let alone a 13-year-old girl from a working-class neighborhood who had never taken a formal acting class in her life. Christy McNichol didn't just meet the challenge. She exceeded in ways that left critics and audiences alike searching for adequate words. What she brought to Buddy Lawrence was not a performance in the traditional sense. It was something closer to channeling. The confusion Buddy felt, the longing for stability, the desire to be seen and understood, those emotions weren't distant from Christy's own experience. She had grown up navigating her own complicated household, had carried responsibilities far beyond her years, and had learned from an early age to read the emotional temperature of the room. All of that lived experience poured directly into her portrayal of Buddy, and audiences could feel every single drop of it. The television industry responded accordingly. Christie received 3 consecutive Emmy Award nominations for Outstanding Supporting Actress in a Drama Series. She won twice, in 1977 and again in 1979. To put that in context, she was winning some of the most prestigious awards in American television before she was old enough to vote. Critics who had spent decades covering Hollywood were writing that they hadn't seen a natural talent like hers come along in years. Viewers were tuning in specifically because of her. Magazine editors put her face on their covers. Talk show hosts invited her to their couches. She became, in the truest sense of the phrase, America's sweetheart. But unlike so many who carry that title, Christie wore it with discomfort because even as the world was celebrating her, she was quietly experiencing something that would take years to fully understand. Fame is rarely what it appears to be from the outside. For Christy McNichol, the gap between the public image and the private reality was particularly wide and particularly painful. From the time she was a young child working in commercials, she had been the primary breadwinner of her family. Her earnings paid the rent. Her income kept the lights on. Her work was not a childhood passion project or a fun after-school activity. It was an economic necessity, and everyone around her knew it. This created a dynamic that Christie herself would later describe as a kind of emotional role reversal. In most households, children are the ones who are nurtured, protected, and allowed to be young. In Christie's household, she was a provider. She was the one whose professional performance determined the family's financial stability. She was the one who had to stay composed, stay professional, and keep delivering regardless of what she was feeling inside. While her peers were experiencing the relatively ordinary dramas of adolescence, including awkward school dances and friendship conflicts and the slow discovery of identity, Christie was negotiating contracts, managing publicity commitments, and carrying the weight of her family's future on her teenage shoulders. She did it without visible complaint. She did it with grace and professionalism that made everyone around her forget, or perhaps choose to forget, that she was just a child. And in doing so, she buried something important. She buried her own needs. She buried her own exhaustion. She buried the voice inside her that was asking, quietly at first and then with increasing urgency, when does someone take care of me? When Family concluded its run in 1980, Christie was 18 years old. She had already accomplished more than most professional actors achieve in an entire career. She had 2 Emmy wins to her name. She had a loyal, devoted fan base. She had proven herself capable of handling dramatic material with a maturity that defied her age. By any objective measure, she was a success story. But she was also, beneath all of that, profoundly tired in a way that sleep alone couldn't fix. Rather than slow down after Family ended, the pace of Christie's career accelerated. Hollywood had recognized what it had in her, and it had no intention of letting that asset sit idle. Almost immediately, she was cast in Little Darlings, a film opposite Tatum O'Neal that examined adolescence with a candor unusual for its time. Her character, Angel, was a street-smart girl concealing a profound vulnerability beneath a tough exterior. It was, in retrospect, a role that reflected its actress with almost uncomfortable accuracy. The film was a commercial success and cemented Christie's reputation as more than just a television star. She was a movie actress now, capable of holding her own on the big screen alongside established talent. The offers that followed were substantial, high-profile projects, significant salaries, roles that any actress in Hollywood would have fought for. And Christie said yes to all of them. In 1981, she took on a particularly demanding role in Neil Simon's Only When I Laugh, playing the daughter of a woman fighting addiction. The film earned her a Golden Globe nomination and was praised by critics who noted that she was operating at a level far beyond her years. From the outside, it looked like an unstoppable career trajectory. Inside, it was something else entirely. Christie would later reflect that she had never developed the ability to say no, not to directors, not to producers, not to the people managing her career, not even her own mother, who, despite genuinely loving her daughter, had also grown accustomed to a certain standard of living that depended on Christie's continued output. There was always another project, Always another reason to push forward. Always another voice telling her that stopping, even briefly, was not an option. By 1982, what had been building for years began to surface in ways that could no longer be ignored. The relentless schedule had taken a measurable toll on her health. She was experiencing anxiety at a level that interfered with basic functioning. Sleep had become elusive. Weight had dropped. The emotional reserves she had been drawing on since childhood were running dangerously low. In 1984, Christie accepted a role in a romantic drama titled Just the Way You Are, filmed in the French Alps. The role required her to play a musician navigating both physical disability and emotional self-acceptance, a story that carried a painful irony given what she was experiencing privately. By the time filming began, her mental and physical health had deteriorated significantly. She was experiencing panic attacks. She was suffering through nightmares that disrupted whatever fragile sleep she managed to find. Her weight continued to drop in ways that alarmed the people close to her. She has spoken since about asking for help during this period and being told, in the way that Hollywood often handles inconvenient human fragility, to simply push through. The project couldn't stop for her. The schedule couldn't accommodate her pain. The machine kept moving, and it expected her to keep moving with it. She finished the film, but something had broken that couldn't be easily repaired. When she returned home, doctors gave her a diagnosis that validated what she had been experiencing, but had never had language for. She was dealing with severe exhaustion, anxiety, and the accumulated emotional trauma of a lifetime of suppressing her own needs in service of everyone else's. There was also, emerging slowly into clearer focus, something more specific, a mood disorder that created cycles of intense emotional states that she had been managing or attempting to manage, largely alone for years. The tabloids were not kind. They never are. The narrative that took shape in the press was one of a former child star who couldn't handle success, a young woman who had somehow failed at the very thing she was supposedly built for. The real story was both simpler and more heartbreaking. She was a human being who had been given an extraordinary gift, thrust into extraordinary circumstances at an extraordinarily young age, and then left to navigate the consequences of all of that largely without adequate support. She was not falling apart. She was finally, honestly, at the end of something that should have ended much sooner. In 1988, an offer arrived that seemed to promise something different. NBC was developing Empty Nest, a spin-off of the enormously popular Golden Girls, and they wanted Christie for a central role. She would play Barbara Wesson, a police officer living with her widowed father, a character with warmth, humor, and strength. It was not the emotionally harrowing drama of Family. It was lighter, warmer, more manageable, and for a while, it was exactly what she needed. The show was a hit. Audiences who had missed her were thrilled to have her back. Her co-stars were generous and warm. The working environment was supportive in a way that some of her earlier experiences had not been. For several seasons, she found a rhythm that worked. But the underlying conditions that had nearly broken her in the early 1980s had not disappeared. They had merely quieted temporarily. The mood cycles continued. The sleepless nights returned. The emotional waves that she had spent a lifetime learning to hide from cameras and colleagues came back with their familiar force. In 1992, in the middle of the show's 5th season, Christy McNichol made a decision that she had perhaps been building toward for her entire adult life. She left, not dramatically, not with a public statement or a press conference or a farewell episode. She simply stepped away, citing health reasons through a publicist who offered no further detail. The entertainment industry and the public were largely puzzled. Speculation filled the space where explanation should have been. But Christy herself was not confused. She knew exactly why she was leaving, and she knew that for once in her life, she was going to prioritize her own well-being over everyone else's expectations. She returned briefly in 1995 for the Empty Nest finale, giving the character of Barbara a proper conclusion and giving fans a gentle, graceful goodbye. After lending her voice to a handful of animated projects in the late 1990s, she stepped away from performing entirely. Hollywood would not see her on screen again. What Christy McNichol did after leaving Hollywood is, in many ways, more remarkable than anything she accomplished within it. She built a life, a quiet, intentional, genuinely happy life, something that had been unavailable to her from the time she was a small child standing in front of the camera. She began teaching acting at a private school in Los Angeles. The decision was characteristically thoughtful. Teaching allowed her to remain connected to craft she had loved even when the industry surrounding it had damaged her. She could share her experience, her hard-won understanding of emotion and honesty and presence, with young students in an environment completely free from the pressures that had defined her professional years. She reportedly told her students regularly that acting was never about fame. It was about empathy. It was about the courage to be truthful. In 2001, she took another courageous step, this time publicly. She spoke openly about her diagnosis of bipolar disorder, describing the years of private struggle and explaining why she had ultimately walked away from a career that most people would have done anything to have. Her candor was remarkable for its time. Mental health was not discussed openly in popular culture the way it is today. The stigma was significant and real. By speaking honestly about her experience, Christy offered something valuable to countless people who were fighting similar